Kieran and ICMJ crew for making this webinar happen. So it's been great to be able to share some learnings from our trip overseas to a few of the Asian countries there. So today I'll be presenting on some on-ground insights from Japan, China, and Indonesia, trying to link those production realities with policy and trade forces that are shaping demand that we see in Australia and how that influences our markets overseas. So I'm Nathaniel Modra, as Kieran mentioned. I'm an independent consultant based in the southeast of South Australia, working across South Australia and Western Victoria. I'd just like to mirror Kieran's comments and thanking sponsors, Bindery, Fletcher's, and then also AMPC and MLA. So starting off with, I guess, gathering an understanding of why these markets matter. So Japan, China, Indonesia are major drivers of the Australian red meat demand that we see at our farm gate processors and then what they're actually purchasing overseas. What we were able to realise was each of those markets have a different driver around their quality, affordability, and then also the policy they might have set in their own countries. The trade access that we get as a country increasingly shapes the farm gate profitability. So for us at a farm gate to be able to have access to these markets, reasonably you can expect that allows us to access more markets, which then means our returns can potentially be increased as well. If you don't have access to those markets, it will restrict our ability to gain quite healthy farm gate returns. Consumer trust, our eating quality, really showed to have quite a strong competitive advantage in these markets. They really trusted the Australian brand and they really rated how we could differentiate different quality of cuts and products into those markets. So what we saw with our first country we visited, so Japan was our first one on our trip. That was quite a mature premium demand that you saw into those markets. So we export to around that 250 tonnes shipped weight of beef into Japan. And we're sort of getting quite a lot of value out of that, so up to that sort of $2 billion mark. Food service accounts for quite a lot of the consumption there in Japan, which is a good thing to have, and some will be diverse across food service, retail and wholesale. As you can see by the graph there, there's a reasonable mix of countries that sort of Japan imports from, Australia being quite a solid supplier. Then you've got US, Canada, New Zealand and a few other countries in the mix there. What we heard from our Japanese consumers in the market over there was they really strongly value consistency and safety. So that's the things they really try to focus on. And we can sort of demonstrate that consistency with, the way we grade our product and get into those markets. And then they also care about how safe that is. So we can demonstrate that with the way our processes are, go through all their QA standards and stuff like that. There was some concern in those markets around the weak yen they're seeing and inflation they're seeing, like a lot of other global economies are seeing, and that's affecting purchasing behaviour, maybe making people step down a category potentially. But they really value Australia for being quite a well-balanced protein to buy from, so not too fatty and quite a sort of healthy protein as well. What we see on those on-ground observations, you've seen quite a lot of premium positioning, which remains critical for our brand. Like I mentioned earlier, Australian beef is trusted for that clean and safe production. There's a strong focus on presentation, marbling and consistency. So as you can see there from the bottom photo, that's beef that's been imported from Australia under the brand Gippsland Fresh Beef. But they've gone to the effort to put a fake lettuce leaf in there to present, showing a bit of contrast in the colour. So they go to a lot of effort. There's often a lot of packaging on stuff. Things are packaged a bit smaller than you might see in Australia. So that's what we sort of saw on the supermarket side of things. There was also a very large focus on convenience retail and those ready-made meals, as you see in the top picture there on the slides. Doesn't present quite the nicest in my opinion, but it's quite a common thing, and those meals are often quite warm, so they're prepared the day of into supermarkets and potentially consume that day as well. So there's a lot of focus around that, and then how can we get our sort of protein into those ready-made meal market. We still saw quite a high-end food service having, influential demand on some of our higher quality cuts, which is good to see. And it's still functioning by their reports quite well, even though there is some economic pressure they're seeing overseas. So looking into one of the farms we were able to visit, so Ono Farm, was quite really cool to be able to go through and see how they produce Wagyu in their supply chain and how they sort of go from calf to, abattoir and processing, all in one property. So they're buying those cows quite young, feeding them milk and then weaning them and going through a feedlot ration all the way up until they're sent for processing. They have Wagyu and also some F1 genetics, but it sort of shows that precision-focused beef production system. They have a very strong attention with consistency in animal care, so that's very, high spec for them. And their beef that they're supplying is positioned as an eating experience, not just a commodity. So they're quite specialty in their focus. They've got a restaurant on farm there, so they're going to the whole supply chain, don't process there, but then they are selling product at the restaurant on farm there. So there's that integration between production, feeding, processing, and retail, and it all sort of feeds one way and also feeds back the other way as well. The Japanese consumers really love that sort of ideology around they have a high value of trust, provenance, and also that marbling quality. So it really sits and works well in the Japanese supply chain. I would highlight there was a high labour and infrastructure investment. So you can see in the bottom photo, there's lots of sheds, tents to raise the calves on milk in their own individual pens and then move through to bigger feedlot pens. Everything's stored on farm. It's just very infrastructure intensive. And also there's a high labour component as well. But he's getting a return at the other end to make that sort of pay. And it's built quite a large brand and he has quite a consistent product as well. It was sort of interesting to see how the consumer expectations at the other end, so what they expect sort of flows all the way through to how he starts his system off. And it sort of shapes those farm production decisions from an early age, more or less. So moving on to China, our next country to visit. So China has, quite a large scale, which sort of boggles the mind quite often around the scale they're operating at. And sort of our competition, the market we're operating in. So China imports, up to 2.5 million tonnes of shipped weight of beef annually, and their consumption is forecast to keep rising towards 2028. Australia remains quite one of the largest chilled beef suppliers into that market, but our South American counterparts are dominating the frozen commodity section of that supply. It was very interesting to see in those markets how convenience and delivery culture is reshaping how consumers across all the demographic ranges are consuming protein and products along those lines. As you can see by the graph there, you can see our friends Brazil and Argentina, Uruguay, so pretty much South American counterparts are taking up a fair portion of that, and Australia is a smaller but quite a high value component of that supply chain and value chain. So what stood out on the ground that we saw in China was there was a heavy investment into branding and consumer engagement. So they wanted to have their consumers engaged in the products they were selling. And as you can see there by the products that we saw that was either Sam's Club or Costco, they've got the Aussie beef label, which is great to see. And they have tracking all the way back to the abattoir in Australia. So I think that's JBS. It's not the best resolution photo, but it sort of tracks the whole way through. So they've got some way to verify that, and that provides consumers with more confidence in the product they're buying. We also saw rapid growth in the premium grain-fed and Wagyu offerings that we're seeing into China. So there's a lot of more interest. That I think is a strip loin, grass, grain-fed for 100 days. So you're seeing more interest in that side of things. We're seeing technology and automation become deeply integrated. So they're quite advanced in how they're managing their supply chains, utilizing AI and stuff like that to predict how things are going to, operate and get their purchasing behavior as it's happening. We saw an increased investment in cold chain infrastructure, so that's improving rapidly, which then allows them to open up other avenues as well. But the last point there around trade policy and geopolitics, that's heavily influencing buying decisions, as we're seeing the safeguard mechanism for our inputs into China could be, you know, we could surpass that this month pretty well. So that'll change buying behaviour. So, the politics getting involved in these things is something to be aware of, and that reshapes buying behaviour as well. Because as we saw in Costco and Sam's Club, our Australian product takes up a considerable amount of shelf space, especially in the chilled section. Like we had 70-80% of the beef there was Australian. So that's going to reshape buying trends as the safeguard mechanism gets enacted and stuff like that. What I also saw in China was the sheep meat opportunities that are developing. So as China remains one of Australia's largest sheep meat markets, and as you can see by the image there, got some Australian lamb that was taken. I believe that one's from JBS. So that was showing, how they're presenting it. There's still quite a lot of growth potential for lamb. It's taken up quite a lot, not a whole lot of shelf space in those large supermarket chains such as Costco and Sam's Club. But that retail lamb growth is linked to convenience, but they also need some education. There is some animosity towards sheep meat in a way. Mutton sometimes had a bad connotation, so a bit more education around lamb and how to cook it and how to consume it can go a long way to increase that demand for the product in China. And affluent customers are still increasingly seeking provenance and quality. So they want to sort of know where it's from, see some nice images, associate what they're purchasing from being, raised and verified in a reasonable environment. So one of the cool sort of businesses we were able to visit in China was Ding Dong Fresh. So that was really interesting because it was a mobile-first grocery platform. So it was designed with apps and mobile as the, I guess, first denominator to make the business work. It wasn't like we see in Australia with Coles and Woolworths, where they've got bricks and mortar stores that then go from there to build apps and stuff like that to make the purchasing behaviour happen. This is a mobile first, so it's designed to be sort of dark stores that don't have people going on them at all, and how that can reshape how people purchase supermarket goods. So there's a very strong focus on convenience and ready to cook, and also a range of products, but it's often, probably in Ding Dong's case, it's tiered more towards the premium end. There are, more of the premium end products available. They really like to focus on that freshness, food safety, and delivery speed. They want to deliver a high percentage within 30 minutes of the orders they get, which is crazy to just think you can do that, but wouldn't quite work in Australia, but good on them in China for making it sort of happen. We're sort of seeing that demand shift beyond just a commodity trade, but into that value-added products. They want to have things in small packages ready to go that they don't have to touch, that they can sell on, that might be, marinated or, different things that are ready to be cooked straight away, or potentially even cooked ready, that then people can just consume. There's young consumers increasingly buying food online, so they don't want to go to a store. They want to talk, communicate to people. They would rather just do it on an app, purchase it, and then get it delivered to them. And I think that premium imported, they still brand us really strongly. They'll do run awareness campaigns on their app for like Australian lamb or Australian beef. So they really love it. They love the images that come with that. And it's interesting, it's just looking at that image that's on there, showing they've really done a whole lot of research of their user profile, and a lot of it's sort of a young family potentially, or a young single professional that are sort of purchasing through their channels, not so much the older generation. So they're sort of targeting their market that way. Moving on to the last country we visited around Indonesia, that was really focusing on, I guess, volume and affordability. They're a quite price-sensitive market, and they remain Australia's largest live cattle export market. So we, export a significant amount of head to Indonesia for them to then continue to feedlot and move on with their growth to then be able to process them through wet market abattoir slaughterhouses, which then move on to their wet market. But what we're seeing there is a rapid middle class growth, which supports more protein demand and potentially more chilled product moving into those markets. As you can see there by the graph, this is the shipped weight from into Indonesia from different markets, and Australia makes up a significant proportion of that shipped weight of product, with India coming in quite solidly behind us. The government over there really prioritises affordability and food security, so they want to see protein remain affordable, cheap, which does create some weird market signals how they're operating. So you need to understand how that interacts with each other. The modern retail and food service channels are expanding, so they're getting more into the value adding side of things, increasing value for Australian product. The on the ground insights that we were able to see there is Australian supply chain still is really highly trusted in how we're sort of selling product, whether that's chilled or live cattle into those markets. They still really value the halal certification and they want to understand traceability. The feedlots are central to the beef supply they have in their country. And as you can see by those photos, it's the ability to purchase cattle for a value price from Australia, then they can value add those animals with a cheap diet that they can, procure reasonably easily in Indonesia, and then add some more weight to them and then process them ready for their wet markets, which still dominate the fresh beef distribution. There is quite a lot of price sensitivity, and that remains extremely high. So they want to, get as much beef as possible for as cheap as price as possible. And we're seeing that interact interestingly with the markets that we're supplying. So thanks for tying that into where that sits from a trade and policy perspective, but those trade agreements continue supporting Australian competitiveness. So having our trade agreements for Indonesia, Japan and China are important in these things. But we're seeing some non-tariff barriers being implemented with tariffs, import permits, and weird ways to manipulate market access is shaping where those products are flowing. We're seeing Brazil and South America increase the pressure in those key markets, but all those markets we visited, so Japan, China and Indonesia, really stated that food security policy was becoming more and more important for their countries. So they want to see this happen, but they need to communicate that well and try and reduce those tariffs and non-tariff barriers that we're seeing. The geopolitical tensions that we're seeing across the world currently with different wars and conflicts creates both risks and opportunities for Australia. You can see if a leader goes tit for tat with another leader, they could create tariffs and things happening in those environments, which could actually benefit Australia. But then there could be other cases where they go tit for tat with us, which creates more risks for us trying to import into those export into those countries. So it's about balancing both the risks and opportunities that we're seeing. So I think coming back to the farm gate and those implications for Australian producers, I think consistency is becoming as important as volume. So just because we can supply a lot of volume into those markets is great, but they need to be somewhat consistent. Supply chains are demanding a level of traceability on the product and also verified claims. Just want to make sure what those markets want, we can verify in some way, shape or mean. Sometimes we don't really align, say what we think are important aspects, they might not see as important, and vice versa. They have other things that are important for them that we might not see as super important. Things such as around sustainability means somewhat different to them to what it means to us. It's about understanding that and then verifying the claims that they want verified. I think the premium opportunities require reliable year-round supply. So we want to be able to position products and brands that can be supplied year-round, although we can only supply for 6 months of the year or such like that. And I think market understanding should influence production systems. So it was great to be able to have the opportunity to see our customers, the wholesalers, and have an understanding of the processes that then come back to the farm gate. Those 4 or 5 or 6 people involved in the supply chain is important, because in Australia we often only see, farm gate to processor, and that's the extent of the supply chain you witness and experience. So being able to understand what our customers and wholesalers want overseas is really valuable, and that can often actually influence what we're producing here. Understanding that helps feedback to farm gate side of things. And then just Australia's reputation remains one of its greatest assets. So we want to make sure we have a good reputation, good claims that we can verify, and a lot of trust around our eating quality claims and our quality assurance claims as well. So just moving to final reflections, I think it sort of boils down to about 3 words here. So I think strategy is important into each of those 3 markets. I think you need a different strategy when working in those markets and what they're chasing, what they want to see, and what sort of relationships you might have. It's all different for those different markets, so each one requires different strategy. The next one, trust. There's a lot of trust in the Australian brand, verified claims, and other things that are associated with Australian beef or red meat that's being sent to those markets. And I think the last one is just an increased understanding of the political involvement and how politics shape how this all moves. Like, I guess in a purely free trade world, you would expect we've got a product here in Australia that want to sell, a consumer overseas wants to buy it, she's better work out on price, and that just happens. But increasingly, we're seeing that be disrupted by different mechanisms that different countries can implement. So it's probably having a deeper understanding of the ways and means that make that more challenging, and the politics that are involved in that, which was quite eye-opening. But no, thank you for the opportunity to present on that, and thank you. Any questions, or chuck back to Kieran?